Hey everyone, welcome to the open question. I didn't stop believing in God because I wanted to rebel. I didn't wake up one day and decide to go against tradition. It happened slowly, like peeling away a layer of paint and finding something very different underneath. It started with questions, not dramatic ones, just quiet ones that wouldn't go away. Why does an all-powerful being care what I eat? Why would a loving creator be obsessed with rituals, with labels, with constant praise? Why would a timeless, perfect being demand obedience like a fragile king? At first, I tried to find answers. I asked people I trusted. I read what I could. I listened to sermons. But the answers I got were vague, or they asked me to ignore my common sense. Just have faith. God works in mysterious ways. That didn't satisfy the questions. It only made them louder. One of the first cracks appeared when I started thinking seriously about suffering. Not just the kind people bring on each other, but the kind that seems baked into the world. A child born with a terminal disease. A natural disaster that wipes out a village. Parasites that burrow into the eyes of children and make them go blind. What possible good can come from that? If a God exists and is good, then surely he would prevent this. If he is powerful, he could stop it. But it doesn't stop. Not even for the innocent. Especially not for the innocent. When people explain this, they say it's a test, or part of a bigger plan. But when the suffering is real and happening to someone right in front of you, those answers feel insulting. A plan that needs children to suffer is not a good plan. A test that involves starving people or lifelong pain is not a test anyone should be proud to design. Over time, I noticed something else. The idea of God didn't come from evidence. It came from culture. People almost always believe in the God they were raised with. Christians grow up in Christian homes. Muslims grow up in Muslim homes. Hindus in Hindu homes. That alone should make us curious. If there really is one true God, why is belief in that God so geographically predictable? It started to look less like people discovering truth and more like people inheriting traditions. And I realized that most of what people believe about God is based not on thinking, but on repetition. On hearing the same things said over and over again until they start to feel true. I also noticed that the behavior of religious people didn't reflect confidence. If someone truly believed in a perfect God, they wouldn't need to silence critics. They wouldn't be afraid of questions. But many religious communities avoid scrutiny. They shut down doubt. They shame people who question the official story. That's not how truth behaves. Truth doesn't need to be protected by fear. It should be able to stand on its own. Another turning point came when I decided to read the holy text myself, not in study groups, not with commentaries, just the words, plain and direct. And what I found shocked me. These texts were full of contradictions, cruelty, and tribal thinking. I read about genocide being commanded, slavery being endorsed, women treated as property, people being killed for tiny offenses. I kept turning the pages, expecting to find the love and wisdom everyone talked about. Instead, I found jealousy, vengeance, favoritism, and punishment. I remember being told that God is love, but the more I read, the more that idea seemed disconnected from the actual texts. A being that floods the earth to kill almost all life, men, women, animals, children, does not match the picture of love. People say that was the Old Testament and that things changed later. But the New Testament brings its own issues. The idea of eternal punishment is introduced there. The idea that people deserve to suffer forever for not believing a specific idea. A punishment that never ends, for a finite mistake. That's not justice. That's cruelty. And if love must be earned through fear, then it's not love. It's coercion. Love that requires a threat isn't real love. It's submission. Then there's the problem of miracles, or more precisely, the lack of them. We're told that miracles used to happen. Seas were parted. Dead people were raised. But somehow none of this ever happens when we have cameras, or hospitals, or scientists around. God used to interact with the world in grand, unmistakable ways. But now, the miracles are always vague. Someone recovered from an illness. Someone found their keys. What kind of all-powerful being stops doing miracles the moment people can record them? If God created the world and wants us to believe in him, why hide so completely? Why make faith a requirement at all? If I wanted someone to trust me, I would offer clarity, not confusion. And yet God remains hidden, except through stories and feelings. But feelings are not reliable. People feel the presence of their ancestors, of ghosts, of spirits, of energies. We know the brain can produce powerful experiences that feel meaningful. That doesn't make them real. And if stories were enough, then every religion would be true. Because every religion has stories. They all claim experiences, visions, revelations. They can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. The further I went, the clearer it became. People don't believe in God because of logic. They believe because of fear, comfort, tradition, or community. God fills a gap. God answers hard questions with soft answers. What happens after death? God knows. Why do bad things happen? God has a reason. But none of that is knowledge. It's just a way to feel better. We are uncomfortable with uncertainty, so we reach for something that makes the uncertainty feel smaller. But comfort doesn't make something true. A belief is not good just because it feels good. We owe it to ourselves to look at the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. What I also started to see is that the idea of God has changed over time. The God people describe today is not the same as the God described a few hundred years ago, and that God wasn't the same as the one worshipped 1,000 years before that. It evolves. It adapts to fit the culture. That doesn't look like truth. That looks like myth adjusting to survive. People used to believe in gods who lived on mountaintops, who threw lightning, who controlled the weather directly. As science explained those things, those gods faded. Now the God that remains is abstract, vague, hard to define. And it keeps retreating further into things we haven't explained yet. When we didn't understand disease, people said it was a punishment from God. When we didn't understand mental illness, they said it was possession. As we've learned more, God has been pushed to the edges of mystery. What we used to call divine, we now call biology, physics, geology. It's not that God has been disproven. It's that the need for God to explain things keeps shrinking. Another thing that shaped my thinking was seeing how religion behaves when it has power. History gives us example after example of what happens when religion controls society. And it's rarely kind. When religion governs, it silences speech, suppresses science, punishes difference, and protects its own authority at all costs. The Inquisition didn't defend truth, it defended power. Blasphemy laws don't protect God, they silence criticism. Even today, in many parts of the world, people are imprisoned or killed for questioning the dominant faith. That kind of fear doesn't grow where truth lives. It grows where power is afraid of being challenged. Religious institutions have too often sided with injustice. They've defended slavery, they've fought against women's rights, they've resisted education, science, and equality. That doesn't mean every religious person is bad, but it shows that religion is not a moral compass. It's a tool. And like any tool, it reflects the hand that wields it. People say religion is necessary for morality, that without belief in God, there would be chaos. But we know that's not true. Countries with the lowest rates of religious belief, places like Sweden, Norway, Japan, are also among the safest, most generous, and most stable. They have lower crime, higher trust, and better health outcomes. Morality doesn't come from religion. It comes from empathy, cooperation, shared values, and a sense of responsibility to others. Most of us don't refrain from murder because of fear of hell. We do it because we understand that others matter, that life is precious, that causing harm is wrong, not because someone says so, but because we can see the harm it does. And when you add fear of eternal punishment or promise of eternal reward into morality, it stops being morality. If you help someone because you're scared of being punished if you don't, that's not kindness. That's obedience. If you only love people because your God tells you to, is it really love? True goodness comes when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain. That's where ethics lives. And it doesn't need a God to exist. Another thing that pushed me further away from belief was the realization that faith is treated as a virtue. But why should believing without evidence be seen as a good thing? In every other area of life, we value doubt, skepticism, critical thinking. We test claims. We ask for proof. But with religion, that process is flipped. You're praised for believing what cannot be proven. You're rewarded for not asking questions. But belief without evidence isn't noble. It's risky. It opens the door to all kinds of false ideas, superstitions, and manipulation. If someone told you they could cure your illness with magic words, you'd want to see proof. If they said they could talk to the dead, you'd want a demonstration. But when someone says there's an invisible being who created the universe and watches everything you do, we're told to just accept it. That doesn't make sense. I also started noticing how often religion causes division. People talk about it bringing people together, and in small groups it can. But on a larger scale, it often does the opposite. It divides people into us and them, believers and unbelievers, saved and damned. It tells people that others who think differently are wrong, broken, or evil. How can a belief system built on that kind of division lead to peace? It rarely does. Wars have been fought over religion. People have died over the smallest doctrinal differences. Even within the same religion, believers split into sects, each convinced they have the truth. The idea that one group has access to divine truth and everyone else is lost is dangerous. It justifies cruelty, it encourages arrogance, and it poisons dialogue. Over time, I realized that I don't need to believe in God to feel awe, to feel connection, to experience wonder. A sunset over the ocean, the birth of a child, the beauty of mathematics, the silence of a forest, the intricacy of the brain. These things are not less beautiful because they weren't created by a deity. They are more beautiful because they exist at all, through a long natural process that we're still trying to understand. I don't need to believe I was designed for a purpose to feel like life matters. Life matters because it's short, because it's fragile, because we only get one. And that makes what we do with it even more important. To be honest, saying I don't believe in God wasn't easy at first. I worried about what people would think. I worried about hurting those I loved. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to be honest, with myself and with others. And what I found was freedom. Not the kind that comes from rejecting rules, but the kind that comes from living truthfully. I don't believe because the evidence isn't there. I don't believe because the idea doesn't hold up under scrutiny. I don't believe because the God I was taught about does not match the world I live in. And I don't believe because I don't need to. That's all for now. If this gave you something to think about, that's what matters. Beliefs should be examined, not just inherited. And sometimes, asking the hard questions is more important than having all the answers. If you're someone who likes thinking for yourself, you're in the right place. Feel free to subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I always find that interesting, and if you think someone else might benefit from this, send it their way. Thanks for being here.